The snow was coming down sideways when they carried him through the doors, and the first thing Elena Sinclair saw was the blood soaking black through a wool scarf wound around his face. They came in fast, 4 men in dark coats with the wind screaming behind them, and the one in front was shouting a word she did not understand, while the others carried the 5th, like something already half gone. There was blood on all of them. There was blood on the floor before the doors had even closed, a long, dragging smear of it across the white tile. And Elena was moving before her mind had finished telling her body to move, because that was the only way she knew how to live inside a night like this one. "Trauma Bay 2, she said, and her voice did the thing it always did, going flat and clear and certain, even as her heart slammed. Put him down here, I need his coat open." The man in front grabbed her arm, not the patient, her. His grip closed around her wrist like a shackle, and his eyes were pale and wild, and he said low, "You save him. You understand me? You save this man or none of us walk out of here." "Then let go of my arm so I can," she said. He let go. It was the first thing she would remember later, that he let go the instant she gave him a reason to, as if underneath the threat there was a man who was simply and completely afraid. She would remember a great many small things about that night, and she would spend a long time afterward trying to understand why. The patient was heavy and cold, and losing himself onto her table. She cut the coat away and found 3 wounds, and each one told her a story she did not have time to read. One high in the shoulder clean through. One below the collarbone still holding whatever had made it. One low on the left side, and that was the one that would kill him. That was the one filling him up on the inside, while the snow filled up the parking lot outside. She packed it and pressed and called for blood, and the pale-eyed man stood at the foot of the table with a gun she was not supposed to see, and watched her hands as though he could keep the man alive by watching. "Get me his face clear," she said. "I need an airway." Nobody moved to unwind the scarf. She reached for it herself, and the pale-eyed man said one sharp word, and every one of them tensed like dogs on a chain. And for one strange second, Elena understood that whoever this bleeding man was, his face was a thing more guarded than his life. She unwound the scarf anyway, because a dying man does not get to keep his secrets from the person trying to keep him breathing. And she folded it back from a jaw gone gray with blood loss from a hard, beautiful face she had never seen before. And she thought distantly, the way you think things at the bottom of an emergency, that he did not look like a man who was supposed to die on a Tuesday in the snow. They worked on him for 2 hours. At some point, a surgeon came down and took him up, and at some point after that, the pale-eyed man and his coats were simply gone, melted back out into the storm, as though they had never bled all over her floor. And Elena stood at the sink, washing another stranger off her hands, and did not yet know that she had just changed the direction of her entire life. She did not learn his name that night. She learned it 3 days later when the whole floor went quiet, the way a floor goes quiet when something dangerous has walked onto it, and a nurse named Priya breathed it to her by the supply closet, with her eyes very wide. "That man you saved," Priya whispered. "In the storm. You know who that was. Tell me you know who that was." "He was a gunshot with a bad tension pneumo," Elena said. "That's who he was." That was Dmitri Volkov. Elena did not know the whole of what that name meant, not yet. But she knew the shape of it. Everyone in the city knew the shape of it. It was a name people said the way they said the word cancer, quietly, as if saying it too loud might make it turn and look at you. It was a name that belonged to shuttered clubs and burned warehouses and men who disappeared. A name the newspapers wrote around, rather than about, because the ones who wrote about it stopped writing. She had held that name open on her table with her bare hands inside its chest. She had felt its heartbeat stutter and catch under her palm. "He's alive," Priya whispered. "Because of you." Elena went home that night and locked her door and told herself it was over, that men like that came through emergency rooms and left them, the way weather came through and left, and that she would never see him again. The first black car appeared outside her building the next evening. The next night there were 2. She told herself they were not for her. She told herself that for almost a week, through the shifts and the snow and the long gray hours at her father's bedside upstairs in the intensive care unit, where Thomas Sinclair lay wired to machines that breathed for him and beeped for him and did everything for him now except wake him up. Her father had been dying slowly for years, ever since the fire, ever since the night that had taken her mother and her little brother Daniel and left her father a ruined and failing man. The debt of keeping him alive had grown into something monstrous, a number she could not look at directly, a thing she paid down in impossible pieces and hid from everyone because there was no one left to tell. She sat with him in the machine light and held his slack hand and did not let herself cry, because if she started, she was afraid she would never be a nurse again, only a girl who had lost everyone. She came out of the intensive care unit on the 9th night to find the billing office had left her a message. And the message was that her father's account had been settled. All of it. Every impossible piece of it paid in full by a name the clerk was not permitted to share. Elena stood in the cold fluorescent hallway with the phone against her ear and felt the floor tilt under her, and she knew the way you know a storm is coming by the smell of the air. Exactly whose name it was. He was waiting by her car. The parking garage was nearly empty at that hour, concrete and shadow and the ticking of cooling engines, and he stood beside her battered little sedan in a long, dark coat with his hands in his pockets. And he did not look like a man who had nearly died in her arms 10 days before. He looked like the thing the men in her emergency room had been afraid of. He looked carved. He looked cold all the way down. "Miss Sinclair," Dmitri Volkov said, "you paid my father's bill." Her voice shook, and she hated it for shaking. "Take it back. That is not how it works. I don't want your money. I am aware." He studied her with a stillness that was worse than any threat. A total attention, as if she were a document he was reading very carefully for a single hidden word. "You want to understand why. You are the kind of woman who cannot leave a question alone. I have watched you fail to leave questions alone for some time now." The cold in her went colder. "What does that mean?" "It means go home, Miss Sinclair. The cars outside your building are mine. They will remain there. No one will trouble you or your father or that hospital ever again, because everything in it is now something of mine, and I do not permit my things to be troubled." He turned to go, and then he paused, and without looking back at her, he said in a voice gone strangely low, "You had blood on your sleeve the night of the storm. You never stopped to wipe it off. You worked the whole time with my blood on your sleeve, and you never once looked at it. I have thought about that more than I should." And then he was gone, and Elena stood alone in the cold garage with her heart going like a fist against a door, and understood that she had not been spared at all. She had been claimed. The weeks that followed taught her the shape of being owned by a man who called it protection. The cars stayed. When she walked to the corner store, a man walked half a block behind her, and when a stranger got too loud on the train, that stranger left at the next stop, with a hand on his shoulder that was not gentle. Her landlord, who had been threatening eviction for 2 winters, suddenly could not do enough for her. A shift supervisor who had made her life small and mean for years was quietly moved to another campus. She was cared for the way a jewel is cared for, watched the way a prisoner is watched, and she could not decide which of those things frightened her more: the caging or the fact that some starved part of her, some part that had been alone and afraid for so long, had begun to lean into the bars. He came to see her father. She found him there one gray afternoon, standing at the foot of the intensive care bed in his dark coat, looking down at the wreck of Thomas Sinclair, with an expression she could not read. He did not touch anything. He stood with his hands behind his back like a man at a grave. "You shouldn't be in here," she said from the doorway. "He was a good man, your father." Dmitri did not turn around. "Before. You don't know anything about my father. I know he was a foreman on the Harbor Line project. I know he saw a set of books he was not meant to see. I know that the fire that took your mother and your brother was called an accident, and I know that it was not one." Now he turned, and his cold eyes found hers, and for the first time she saw something moving underneath the ice, something she could not name. "I know a great deal about your family, Miss Sinclair. I have made it my work to know." Elena could not breathe. The machines beeped. The snow fell past the window in a slow gray curtain. "Why?" she managed. "Go home," he said, which was what he always said, and he walked past her close enough that she felt the cold coming off his coat. And at the door he stopped and he said, not looking at her, "You saved my life. Twice. You do not remember the first time. I have never forgotten it. That is all you need to know." Twice. The word followed her home and would not leave. Twice. She lay awake with it. She had saved him in the storm that was 10 weeks ago. But he had said twice, and the way he had said it, the weight he had put on it, told her the first time was the one that mattered. The first time was the wound underneath everything else. She found it in her own memory, the way you find a splinter by pressing until it hurt, 3 years back. Her first winter as a full nurse before her father got bad, a slow dead shift at 2 in the morning, when a man had staggered in through the ambulance doors, alone, bleeding from a knife wound under his ribs. No wallet, no name, no story he was willing to tell. She had stitched him herself because the doctor was slammed, and the man was quiet and stubborn and refused to be moved. She remembered his silence. She remembered that he had watched her hands the whole time, the same way the pale-eyed man had watched her hands in the storm, and that when she had finished, he had looked at her stitching for a long moment and said in a rough voice that it was good work, that she had a steady hand, that he would remember it. Then he had walked out into the dark before she could bring the paperwork, and she had never thought of him again. She had closed that wound, low on the left side of his ribs. She had put in the sutures herself, a little crooked because she had been new, leaving a small, pale seam, like a signature. The next time she changed the dressing, on Dmitri Volkov's side, she made herself look. He was sitting on the edge of an examination table in a private wing that had not existed a month ago. A wing that was quiet and locked and staffed by people who did not ask questions. And he had allowed only her to tend the healing gunshot wounds, because he had told her flatly he did not like to be touched by hands he did not trust. She had peeled back the tape over the wound low on his left side, the one that had nearly killed him in the storm. And there, a breath above it, was an older scar, a small, pale seam, a little crooked. Her signature 3 years old, healed into the skin of the most feared man in the city. Elena went very still. She did not say anything. She did not have to. He must have felt the change in her hands, the way her fingers stopped, because he went still too. All of that carved stillness turning to something held. And when she lifted her eyes to his face, she watched the truth arrive there, and watched him have nowhere to put it. "It was you," she whispered. 3 years ago. The knife. You had no name. You said I had a steady hand." Her own voice was shaking now. "You said you'd remember." Dmitri Volkov did not answer her. That was the thing she would carry afterward, the thing that told her more than any confession could have. This man who had a cold word for every occasion, who had never once in her presence been caught without something to say, looked at the scar her own young hands had made in his body, and said nothing at all. The silence went on and on. His jaw worked. Something in his eyes cracked clean across, and for the length of a held breath, the mask was simply gone, and what was under it was so raw and so unguarded that she had to look away. "You've been watching me for 3 years, she said into that silence. "Because of a scar. Because of a debt," he said finally, and his voice was not steady either. "I do not leave debts unpaid. You put your hands inside a stranger and kept him breathing, and asked for nothing, not even a name. And I have never in my life been shown a kindness that did not come with a price attached. I did not know what to do with it, so I watched. And then I learned whose daughter you were, and what had been done to your family, and by whom, and I understood that the world had already sent you a bill you did not deserve." He stood and buttoned his shirt over the scar, with hands that were not quite steady, and the mask came back down over his face like a shutter. "And I decided that no one would ever collect it. Go home, Miss Sinclair." "Stop saying that." "Go home," he said, "before I say something I will not be able to take back." And she went because the look in his eyes had frightened her more than any gun ever had. She should have run then. She knew it even as it was happening. A wiser woman, a colder woman, would have taken her father and vanished into the country and left the dark car at the curb to rust. But Elena Sinclair had spent 3 years alone with her grief and her debt and the machines that breathed for the last of her family. And there was something in the way this dangerous man had looked at the scar in his own body as though it were the only tender thing left in the world that she could not walk away from. She told herself it was the mystery. She was the kind of woman who could not leave a question alone. He had said so himself. The question she could not leave alone was the one that nearly killed her. It began with the isolation room. The private wing had grown. There was a corridor now that Elena was not permitted to enter at the far end, past a set of doors that stayed locked, and two of Dmitri's men stood outside it around the clock, and she had learned not to ask. But on a night when the snow had shut down half the city, and the staff was skeleton thin, a monitor began to scream from behind those doors, and the men outside them looked at each other with the particular panic of people trained to hurt and not to heal, and one of them seized her by the arm as she passed and said, "You, nurse, now." The room was lit a sick pale green by the monitors and cold, and a man lay strapped to the bed in it, a gaunt man with tubes down his throat and a chest that was drowning. And Elena did what she was made to do. She was inside the work before she looked at his face. She cleared the airway and started the drip, and brought his pressure up off the floor. And only when the alarm had stopped screaming, and the green numbers had steadied, did she let herself breathe and look at the man whose life she had just pulled back across the line. He was older than the machines made him seem. Hard-faced, even in his sickness. And there was a scar on his throat. A long, twisted silver scar, running from beneath his ear down the side of his neck. The kind of scar that is made by a blade that meant to finish the job and did not. Elena had seen that scar before. She had seen it framed in a doorway of firelight when she was 17 years old. Seen it above the collar of a man who had stood in the smoke of her burning house, and given an order in a language she did not speak. Seen it every single night for 11 years, in the place behind her eyes, where her mother's face used to be. She had described that scar to police, who wrote it down and did nothing. She had drawn that scar in the margins of her grief. Her hand was already on it. She had pressed her fingers to his neck to feel his pulse, the pulse she had just saved, and now her fingers were resting on the scar of the man who had murdered her family, and she could not make them move. The monitors washed the room green. Snow fell past the black window in a slow curtain. And in the doorway behind her, a shadow that had not made a sound, Dmitri Volkov stood, watching her hand on that scar with an expression she had never seen on him, and would never forget. Because for the first time, the fear in his face was not for himself. It was for her, and for what she was about to become. "You know who he is," Dmitri said quietly. "Anton Resnick." She did not know how she got the name out. It had lived so long in the dark of her that speaking it in the light felt like tearing something. He killed them. He stood in the doorway and he watched them burn. And I lived because I climbed out a window and he saw me and he let me go because a child was not worth the bullet. She turned and her hands were shaking, and there was her family's killer's blood on the fingers she had just used to save him. "He's here, in your hospital. You put him here. You've been keeping him alive." "Yes." The single word landed in her like a blade under the ribs. "For weeks," she said, "you knew what he did to me. You told me you knew. And you've had him breathing behind a locked door, and you sent me down that hall every night, and you never told me he was there." Her voice broke apart. "Why? Why is he alive? Why is he alive when everyone I love is dead?" And Dmitri Volkov, who never explained himself, who answered every question with "go home," stood in the green light and gave her the truth, because he had run out of every other thing to give her. "Because Resnick did not decide to burn your house," he said. "Resnick held the match. He was a hand nothing more as a dog that killed on command. And he has never once in 11 years been made to say the name of the man who gave the command. I have hunted that name for 3 years. I burned half my war finding this dog and dragging him out of the hole he lived in, and I got shot doing it in a storm, and I bled out on the table of the only person in this city I have ever trusted with anything, and I did not even know until later that she was the one his fire had orphaned." His voice was low and terrible. "He is alive because dead men name no one. He is alive because the man who ordered your family's death is still out there wearing a good suit shaking clean hands, and Resnick is the only thread that leads to him. If I let this animal die tonight, the man who truly killed your mother and your brother walks free forever." He stopped. His eyes held hers across the green-lit room. "And if you let him die tonight, Elena, so does he. That is the choice I have been carrying for you. That is why I did not tell you. Because I could not bear to be the one who put it in your hands." Elena looked down at the killer of her family drowning slowly on the bed, one drug away from the death she had dreamed of 1,000 times. Her hand still rested on his scar. It would take so little. A wrong number on a dial, a missed alarm. No one in this locked and lawless wing would ever ask. She had spent 11 years wanting exactly this. The power of his life sitting in her hands, the way his blood sat on her fingers. And now that it was here, she understood with a grief that felt like drowning too, that she was not built to do it. She had been built the other way. She had been built to be the steady hand in the worst hour of a stranger's life. It was the only thing the fire had left her, and she would not let Anton Resnick take that too. She fixed his line. She steadied his pressure. She kept the man who killed her family alive, and she wept while she did it. And Dmitri Volkov crossed the room and stood close behind her, not touching, near enough that she could feel the warmth he never let anyone feel. And he said, very low, I know what it costs you. I have never seen anyone do a harder thing. Get the name out of him, she said without turning around. Whatever you have to do, get the name. And then I don't care what happens to him. I will, he said. I swear it to you. He did not get the chance. They came for Resnick that same night because the man who had given the order 11 years ago had learned that his dog had been dragged into the light, and a dead dog tells no tales. The storm that had emptied the city gave them their cover. Elena was still in the wing when the power went out, when the green monitors died all at once, and the locked doors blew inward, and the corridor filled with the flat, hard cracks of gunfire and the shouts of men in the dark. She was on the floor with her back against a supply cart, and her ears ringing before she understood what was happening. And then Dmitri was there, over her, around her, a wall of dark coat and cold fury, and he had a gun in his hand, and his body angled to put himself between her and the corridor, and he was saying her name. Elena. Elena, look at me. You are going to move when I move, and you are going to stay behind me, do you understand? Nothing in this hallway is going to touch you. Nothing. His eyes in the muzzle flash were not cold now. They were burning. I have kept you alive through every night you never knew about. I am not going to lose you in the one you finally see. They went down the corridor in the dark, and the noise, her hands fisted in the back of his coat, his body turning at every sound to keep her covered. And twice he fired past her cheek, so close she felt the heat of it. And twice a man who had been about to reach her fell instead. They made it to the stairwell. He put her behind the heavy door and pressed his back against it, and for one moment, in the red glow of the emergency light, he looked at her, really looked, the mask entirely gone now, and she saw the whole of it in his face. The 3 years of watching, the debt, the guilt, the thing he had refused to say in the examination room, all of it, burning there, naked and unashamed. When this is done, he said, I am going to tell you the thing I decided in the garage not to say. Stay alive long enough to hear it. That is an order. Then the door shuddered under a body's weight, and he turned to meet it, and Elena, pressed into the corner of the stairwell, saw a shape she knew come around the lower landing, with a gun already rising, and she screamed a warning, and Dmitri turned toward her scream instead of the shape, put his body between her and the gun, the way he had put his body between her and everything, and the shot that had been meant for her tore through him instead. He went down hard against the door. Elena did not scream again. Some cold, clear nurse place in her took over the place that had never once failed her, and she was on him before he had finished falling, her hands inside his coat, finding the wound, pressing, and the man on the landing was raising the gun a second time when the stairwell door above them crashed open, and Dmitri's men poured through in a fury of gunfire, and the man on the landing was simply gone. And then it was only the two of them again, the way it had begun, her hands inside his body, keeping him in the world. Don't, she said. Don't you dare. I did not save you twice to lose you on a stairwell. Stay with me. Stay. The name, he breathed. His hand found her wrist, the same wrist his man had shackled in the storm, and his grip was weak now. Resnick. Did they reach him? I don't care about Resnick. Elena. His eyes were going soft and far. Sokolov. It was Sokolov. Maxim Sokolov. Maxim Sokolov. He is the one. Resnick told me an hour ago. He told me the name. It is done. I have it for you. His mouth moved into something that was almost a smile, terrible and tender. I got you the name. Whatever happens now, you have it. He cannot hide behind clean hands anymore. It is finished, it is finished, I kept my word. You'll keep it in person, she said fiercely, pressing harder, her tears falling onto his gray face. Do you hear me, Dmitri? You are going to live, and you are going to walk into a courtroom, or a grave, or wherever it is men like you settle these things, and you are going to end Maxim Sokolov yourself, and you are not going to make me do this without you. I forbid it. I am the steady hand. I decide who dies on my floor, and it is not you. And Dmitri Volkov, the most feared man in the city, looked up at the nurse, whose crooked stitches he had carried in his body for 3 years, and did the thing she had ordered him to do. He stayed. He held on to her wrist, and he stayed through the long, red minutes, until the doors opened and the gurney came through the surgery, through the gray dawn, because a man will do impossible things when the last tender part of him is standing over his body, refusing to let go. She did not leave his side for 3 days. When he woke, the first thing his eyes found in the room was her asleep in a chair, with her hand still holding his, and the nurse in her felt the change in his pulse, and woke, and for a long moment neither of them said anything at all. The snow had stopped outside the window. The city was white and clean and hushed. You said you'd tell me, she said at last quietly. The thing from the garage. You said to stay alive to hear it. Dmitri looked at her for a long time. He was pale and stripped of every weapon he owned, no coat, no gun, no cold, only a man in a bed who had run out of reasons to hide. And when he finally spoke, his voice was rough and low and certain in a way it had never been when he was strong. I decided that night that I loved you, he said, in the garage. When you told me to take the money back, I had told myself for 3 years that it was a debt that I watched over you because I owed you a life, that it was only accounting. And you stood there in the cold and refused the one thing everyone else in my world has always wanted from me. And I understood that it had stopped being a debt a long time ago, and that I was too much of a coward to say it, because everything I love the world takes. It took my war. It took my name. It found the one good thing your family had made, which was you, and it burned everything around it trying to reach me. His hand tightened on hers. I did not want to be another fire in your life, Elena. I still do not know that I am not. But I am done deciding your choices for you in the dark, so I am telling you in the light. I love you. I have loved you since before I knew your name, and I will spend whatever is left of me making sure the world never sends you another bill you did not earn. Elena Sinclair, who had lost everyone, who had learned to keep her grief the way you keep a coal alive under ash, leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his, careful of the wound, careful of everything, and let the tears come at last, and they were not only grief. Then live, she whispered against his mouth. That's all I'm asking. That's the whole bill. Live, and let me stop being the only one keeping you breathing. Maxim Sokolov did not survive the winter. What happened to him happened quietly, in the way such things happen in that world, and Elena did not ask, and Dmitri did not tell, and Anton Resnik, having given up the last name he had to give, was handed alive to the people whose slow and lawful justice would keep him breathing in a cage for the rest of his days, which was Elena, decided a crueler thing than the death she had refused him, and a cleaner one for her hands. The dark cars still sat outside her building at night, but she had stopped being afraid of them. She knew now what they were. They were not bars. They had never been bars. They were a promise made by a man who did not know how else to make one, that she would never again stand alone in the smoke. Thomas Sinclair died gently in the spring, with his daughter's hand in his, and at the foot of the bed a hard, quiet man who had bought the wing so that a good man could go without pain. Elena grieved him the honest way the fire had never let her grieve the others out loud, in the arms of someone who stayed. And on a clear, cold morning, after standing at the window of a house that was warm and safe and hers now too, watching the snow that no longer frightened her come down soft and clean over the city, she felt Dmitri come to stand behind her, felt the warmth of him. She was the only one in the world allowed to feel. And she leaned back into it, and she was not caged, and she was not owned, and she was not alone. You have that look, he said against her hair. The one you get when you cannot leave a question alone. I was thinking, Elena said, that I stitched you 3 years ago and left a crooked scar, and I still don't know how to do it straight. His arms came around her, and she felt him smile, which almost no one living had ever felt. Don't, he said. Learn to do it straight, and I will only have to go and get shot again, somewhere you would have to close it right. and I am too old to keep bleeding my way into your hands." He turned her, and the cold was entirely gone from his eyes now, had been gone for a long time, and he looked at her the way he had looked at the scar in his own body, as if she were the only tender thing left in the world, and this time he did not tell her to go home. He had become her home. "Stay," he said instead. It was the opposite of every word he had ever spoken to her, and it was the only order she had ever intended to obey. Outside, the snow came down over Boston, soft and endless and white, covering the crooked streets and the leaning houses and the black cars at the curb. And for the first time in 11 years, it did not remind Elena Sinclair of anything she had lost. It only reminded her that she had, against every impossible odd, been found.